Hello, 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 and welcome to Most Writers Are Fans, the podcast that explores the intersection between writing and fandom. My name is Terry Bartley, and I'm your host. Welcome to Season 5, everybody. I can't believe this is the 5th season of this podcast. See, I've been doing this for about a year now, and it's kind of wild that I've been doing this podcast for so long, and I've met so many interesting people, and that, I've been able to sort of keep learning more and more and more about being an independent creative and what that is like in today's world, which, by the way, challenging. Not always the easiest thing to do. But today's going to be a great episode. I'm going to be interviewing the indie pop musician, singer, songwriter, Olen. We became friends. We talk all about it in the interview. But it was a great chance to get to talk to him. And, it's been a minute since I've had sort of a heart-to-heart with you guys and talked about just like what I'm going through and what I'm doing. And it's been, a lot has happened since then, right? My book has come out. My second book has come out, which is a light novel version of the first book. And, things have been happening. So I just want to talk a little bit about just sort of like what life has been like and what it's like to, be a published author officially. And then also like what it is like to sort of like navigate this. And the thing that I often think about is that it is hard to know what to expect. Because, I went into this and my goal for book sales initially was 2,000 books. Because I remember seeing a video somewhere that the average amount of books in their lifetime sell 2,000 books. Which, by the way, that's not... my books have been out for 4 months or something now. So, it's not been a long time. But, that's how many books sell in their full lifetime. So I thought that if I maybe sold that many in the beginning, early on, then that would set me up for success. If I could prove that I could sell that many, the average number early on, that would sort of prove to me oh, there's some momentum here. This could happen. And I don't think I need to tell anybody who's also an indie author this, but I've not reached 2,000 sales yet. It's hard to get there. But that doesn't mean that I've not been successful. I've sold a good number of books, and I've had some positive reviews and some people that have had positive experiences with the book. And I feel like that is successful. And also, not for nothing, but I talked about on this podcast, the whole purpose of releasing Tyranny of the Fae, my first book, was to kind of set myself up for success, right? I wanted my novel, which is the next big release I'm going to have, to be successful. And in order to do that, it made sense to release a first book. It made sense to release another book first, so that I could kind of learn the process and just kind of move through it. And I feel like I have been doing that. I have a pretty good grasp of how to release a book now. I have a pretty good grasp of hiring editors and getting cover designs and promotion and all those things. I have a pretty good sense of that now. And I'm building a bit of a following. I feel like I've been doing okay in that front as well. And I'm not the rousing success I maybe had hoped that I had been, but I'm climbing. And I feel like that's positive. And I think that it's hard when you're in this bubble of being an indie creative, and honestly, the thing that's so challenging about it is you check book sales every day, it's a thing you do in the beginning, and you check things followers on your social media every day, and whenever your value as a person becomes reduced to a number or a series of numbers, it's so demoralizing. And truly, nothing like that changes day to day in a drastic way unless some wild thing happens. But you convince yourself that you have to check it constantly to see if you're making progress, if you're moving forward. But it doesn't matter. Ultimately, it doesn't matter that much. You're going to make it when you make it. And also, usually the big moves, whenever I released the book, I had a ton of sales during pre-release. Same for the second book, I'm a Princess That Ran Away to a Magical World. That book had quite a few pre-sales. So, whenever you make a big move and you're intentionally make it that you've built up to, usually it becomes pretty successful. But then these little bits over time, is more about maintenance than it is about growing. And I know that I want to make a video on TikTok that goes viral and blows my career into the stratosphere, and then I have this viral book talk sensation and people buy my book and I become this famous author because of this one video I made. But the truth is that's so rare. And honestly, what you're doing, the maintenance you're doing is just sort of maintaining your audience and giving them something to continue following you. You want them to, whenever they scroll through their followers list, you want them to remember your name so that they don't unfollow you if they do a series of unfollows. Like, you want them to have some reason why they want to keep following you. And that's what that maintenance is. But as I said, it is hard. It is hard to remember that because like you want to be successful and you want your career to immediately take off, but it's just not the reality, right? But I've honestly been having such a great time and I feel so good about where I'm headed. The live tour was very good. I didn't talk about that much because we had all the live shows, but the live tour has been so good and I've enjoyed the experience, which was one of the goals anyway. And I've made so many great contacts with bookstore owners that I feel like I am setting myself up for success. And even though I'm not there yet, that doesn't mean that I'm not getting there, you know? And it's just so important to remember that. And here's the real thing. It's so important to not get so bogged down in the numbers. And truly, like, you need to just not check those numbers every day. Like, maybe once a week, if that. And I think when you get to that place, whenever you start making things for yourself, whether that's a show, whether that's a podcast, whether that's a book, whatever it is, I think when you start making stuff for yourself and then just kind of releasing it on your own schedule, I think that's whenever you start making like the good stuff, you know? And I think that you need to just kind of like not worry so much about like the algorithm. And I know that we're supposed to, right? We're supposed to worry about it. We're supposed to like dig into it. But the thing is, like, we need to just be people. And also, like, we need to not, like, when you're an indie creative, you're your own marketing team. You're your own, press corps. You're everything, right? You're everything. You're your manager. You're your agent. You're your press corps. You're all of those things. And I think that part of this process is sort of accepting, like, you're one person. And that doesn't mean that you shouldn't, like, go out and get help and try to find people that can be on your side. But also, like, take a break and don't feel like you have to do everything all at once because nobody can. And you got to learn how to take some breaks for yourself. And that has been a lesson that I am still learning, I will say. I've got so much more to say. Like I said, so much has happened, but I will save it for the next intro because I want you guys to hear this really great interview that I did with Olen. He's an incredible musician, and you guys should hear about his journey and what got him to where he is because he's an incredible singer-songwriter that more people should hear, and how he got here and the journey that he's on. Like, he's actually been on this journey for quite some time, and I feel like that's resonant to like the experience that I'm going through right now because I can see somebody who has kind of like been riding those ebbs and flows for quite some time and hasn't lost like his spirit to keep going. And that's sort of the thing we need is like that passion and that spirit to just sort of keep moving through this like path that we're on. All right, so we'll be right back with my interview with Olen. Welcome back to Writers or Fans. My name is Terry Bartley. I'm joined by the singer-songwriter Olen, wildly successful musician who once opened for Billie Eilish, right? So, no, once Billie Eilish was open for him. I always get that backwards. So whenever I have guests on that I know already, I always like to kind of like go through this story of how we met so listeners sort of know. So what I'd like to do here, if you're cool with this, is kind of go over our like weird, complicated story of how we met. And then you fill in the blanks a bit, because I think that through this story, we're both going to be able to talk a little bit about like what we do now and why we do it. Yeah. And I think it'll be an interesting way to kind of like do this interview a little bit. You opened for one of my favorite bands, Sub Radio, like almost a year ago, a little under a year ago.
I think so, yeah.
And I started following you primarily because your single Got a Name came out while you were on tour with them and they shared it. And it's like, great. It's a really cool, fun song that I'm super into still to this day. So I started following you just for the fact that like I wanted to follow this cool new musician that I was into. But then something struck me because you do a lot of these videos where you talk straight to the camera. It's like promo-y stuff, a lot of like stories, things like that. And there was a lot of like offhanded comments you would make about like how you felt about your career, especially when it came to things like sort of feeling like you would have liked to have been further along. Like you have this sense that you'd like to be further along. And I'm in a similar position because I worked in journalism for a while. I've been writing for like
20 years, but I've only been writing like fantasy and fiction for the past 5 years. I've only been pushing the career for like a year or so.
Yeah.
So like I'm new to this, but I'm not new to what I do. So like I feel like had I done it on the schedule I was like quote unquote supposed to, then I should have been like much further along than I am. And like that was a thing that like really struck me. And then I would leave like these really elaborate comments on your videos that felt like maybe too personal to be leaving on a public comment. So I'm curious like how you were perceiving that at the time. Like, did you feel like, oh, what a sweet fan? Or was it like, this feels different?
No, I think I will always admire the heart on the sleeve approach to like communication. So I would never look at a comment like that and be like, oh, like that's TMI, because I feel like I've made a whole business of sharing my business, like in song or like even on social media. And so, yeah. So anyways, I always felt like I could relate to what you were saying anyway. So no, I didn't feel like it was weird at all. So yeah, I will always approach the respect this approach, even if it feels like it's TMI.
Well, I always felt like as a fan, it felt different because I didn't feel like a fan. It felt like I was making friends with a person. It didn't feel parasocial. You know what I'm saying? Like it felt like I was like having a conversation with somebody that I highly related to.
Yeah, no, I mean, and again, and ultimately we did become friends. So it wasn't, it definitely wasn't that. And yeah, like I just feel like, I feel like that's probably the best. You know, there are obviously positives and negatives to social media, but that is probably one of the true positives. Like when you can create a space or like be in a space where you can just like actually have a conversation with like another human being, you know, like it's not just it's not transactional. It's just like you're just talking to the other person. And like, that's like, I don't know. I feel like that's social media when it's doing it right. So I'm happy about that.
Yeah. So then we sort of arguably met that way. Like it's not even really meeting because we were just like chatting in each other's comments as a DM here or there, but it wasn't really like, we knew each other. And then I invited you onto the podcast because I was planning this book tour. And like I said in that post earlier, like you were one of the first people I invited because it was like, it just seems like I want to talk to you. You know what I mean? Like I got to the point where it was like, I need to meet this person. Like we're slowly becoming friends. Like it feels like this has to happen at this point. And at that point, and then also like I've been doing this strategy for people that I admire where it's like, I'd rather be a peer than like a fan. Does that make sense? Like I'd rather like approach them as a peer as opposed to being like, hey, I'm a big fan. I want to follow for this reason. And also like at that point, like you really only had, because I mean like you had the Armor stuff out that you had recently rebranded. You didn't have a ton of like Olen music out at that time. So like, it wasn't even really all that possible for me who didn't really follow Armors to be like a big fan because I didn't even go to the sub radio shows because I'm on the East Coast and you're on the West Coast, right? So like,
we started on the West Coast of that run, or at least Midwest, I think, is when we started on that one.
Yeah, so you were like, you were nowhere near where I live, so like it wasn't even like plausible that I would have been able to go to any of those shows. And then it was like, well, I need to meet this person though. Like I need to meet this person. So then sort of talk through that experience because I got the sense that you were like a bit flattered to be invited to a podcast because you shared a thing later that said like that it was like your first podcast you were going to be on.
Yeah, I mean, dude, like and this is something that I actually talked about in therapy when I'd started, and I know we're going to talk about mental health later, but like my therapist, Frank, and he challenged me because I was like especially like when I was really consumed by my OCD, like so afraid of the idea of being on a podcast, like just like the anxiety they gave me, or like the fact that like what if I say something so stupid and so insensitive and like just like something that like is just deeply offensive, and just like I don't know, like I was really paralyzed by that fear. So like one of his challenges to me was like, get on a podcast, you know, like don't say no. Don't say no to that stuff because like you don't have, you know, like just stretch yourself, like be comfortable with that kind of thing. And so that I guess now, like since the EP has been out, like this was the live one was supposed to be one of my first, but I've done a couple online since then, and it is not as scary as you know I thought it was going to be, and yeah, so that was going to be. And that was definitely going to be my first live podcast because I haven't known that to be a thing for super long. I know people are starting to do it, But yeah, so that's why I was stoked when you'd sent the email.
That's funny to give me context because so you wanted me to reach out to your manager, and I got the gist from his response that he was kind of like, this is going to be hard for him because I wanted you to meet me like an hour away from where you live, so like it wasn't going to be easy for you to get there. And I got the sense that he was like, he probably should say no to this, but like I get the sense he wants to do it, so like he probably will. And it's funny now because it's almost like you were like, well, my therapist wants me to do this, so I have to do
it. Yeah, like it's one of those things that and you know, I love X, and he's always trying to like protect me from myself at times too, you know, and so he's always looking out. And so yeah, like and you know, because he'd brought me opportunities in the past where I'd been like, I just don't know if I'm up to it, you know. So
yeah,
like there's probably some residual of that, you know. But again, I am just really happy to have the platform, the opportunity, and again, it also helps that like we're friends too. Like it's just easier. So happy to be here.
So let's jump ahead to the day of the interview. So the day before, I had torn my calf muscle. Like I was like halfway through the tour. So like I'd been driving across the country. I live in West Virginia and I was in LA at this point. So like literally across the country.
Yeah.
And so I tore my calf muscle and I was like sort of distraught just from that because I was it felt like middle of nowhere. Then I remembered it was Los Angeles. So like it was nowhere close to middle of nowhere. Like it was like the second biggest city in the world. And so that was like a good reality check for me to be like, well, there's a perspective here.
You're still so far from home, so might as well be the middle of
so like I couldn't go home, right? Like it was like impossible to just go back home. But so like I was like upset about that, but I had sort of gotten over it. Like it was like, this is what it is. Like I need to, like, this show's already scheduled, so like I'm not gonna cancel at the bookstore since I'm physically here already. So like that was happening anyway. And I even grabbed brunch with my friend that day because I already scheduled it again. Like I didn't want to cancel it. So at this point I was like, well, this is frustrating. I hate to be on crutches, but the show's going to go on. I was excited to get to talk to Olen. And then at that point, I got a message from you. Like, I think it was like that morning. You had thrown your back out, I think, playing tennis.
Oh, yeah.
It was like it was probably at the same time. Like, it was probably like literally at the same time that we injured ourselves.
Yeah, mine was like 6 or 7 p.m.
Yeah.
It was like 6 or 7
literally
p.m.
around the same time. So usually I think I would have been like really upset about having to find a guest last minute. But honestly, like after tearing my capitals, I was like, I mean, the hits kept on coming. It is like, this is fine. And like, I wasn't going to be upset with you either way because like you didn't choose to injure yourself. But at the same time, like it wasn't even frustrating at that point because it's like, I mean, I'm going to make the best of this. It is what it is.
Yeah, like it just like makes sense that would also happen to both of us. Like and it was just so dumb too. In high school and as a kid, like I would do tournaments and stuff and was super into it. But then like over the last few years, like I just like don't play. And so I just on a whim, I was like, you know what, I'm gonna go play on the back court at my court, you know, that's like close to my house at the park. Like I'll just, you know, drive over there, play. And so I'm just hitting by myself. And then this like dude comes up and he's like also hitting, and realize we're like similar, you know, like ability level or whatever. And so he's just like, do you want to just hit? I was like, yeah, sure. And then like we're starting to hit, and then I'm like, oh gosh, this guy's like really good. Like he's like, turns out like he's like a tennis coach. And just like, and so I'm like now in over my head where like I'm this guy that like I've set foot in a court like maybe 2 times in the last like couple of years. And so I'm just like trying my hardest to, you know, not just like embarrass myself, because it's one thing when you're just hitting against a solid wall, but then like when you're playing against another person who's like hitting the ball back to you with velocity and like matching it, you know, like all that stuff. It's like, So anyways, I was just like playing, and I'd hurt my back a couple years ago lifting a subwoofer. And so it's like never really fully been the same. And so, yeah, I was just playing out of my depth. And so like, just because I went to go like try, like, and again, it was only just because of ego. I could have very easily been like, cool, I'm just not going to like I'm not going to overextend, because I'm just like, I haven't done this in years. Like, I was just like, no, I'm going to do this. And then like, it was towards the very end of our like session where like felt it go, and I kept going for a little bit, and then like we were done, and I'm like limping to my car, and I was like, this sucks. And then when I woke up that morning and I texted you, I was like, I don't think I can get up. like I'm not going to be able to sit in a car and like drive for an hour and a half, because it's like I can't move. Like, so, and anyways, enough about my injury, but that was what led to me texting you that morning. And then, like, because I think I might have even commented on your thing, like, that when you posted on Instagram, like, hey, like, feel better. And then, like, it just, I don't know, it just sucked. All of it just sucked.
Yeah. So at that point we were both injured. I ended up doing this show. There's a tarot card reader at the store. I don't even know why that's a thing. But
like, an in-house tarot card reader?
Yeah. Like, he just comes in a day a week and does tarot readings for people at the bookstore.
Well, and it happened to be the same day you were there, so that worked out.
Yeah. So I, like, not a writer per se, but he reads people. So
sure,
a bit of a stretch for this podcast, but it was like just having someone to bounce off of is useful. So it's like, sure, I'll interview a tarot reader. That makes sense, I guess. And we had a fascinating conversation about fantasy and, like, real life magic and, like, how those things tie together. So, like, it was fun, but it wasn't at all what I intended, because I wanted to have this, like, fun conversation with this new friend, you know, like, that was the intention, and it didn't happen. But then at the same time, I also messaged you because at that point I feel like we had, like, trauma bonded to some extent, because it's like same day this injury happened. Like, I think that we both were looking forward to the podcast, and, like, we both were disappointed that we didn't get to do what we wanted to do. Yeah. So then I was like, we were gonna grab lunch before, because, like, I just wanted to hang out with you. That was literally the reason why I wanted to have lunch with you. And also, like, you mentioned that it was gonna make you more comfortable. But then I was like, well, since we're both here, if you just want to hang out for just fun, like, let me know. We could just catch up before I leave town. And then we did. And then that's whenever I feel like I didn't expect a missed podcast appearance and double injuries to lead to what feels like a pretty legitimate friendship. But, like, here we are.
Yeah. Right. Absolutely. The world is weird. It's just weird. It was like, and it worked out. I mean, again, it worked out for me because I only had to drive like 25 minutes, and, like, that was 2 days post the injury. And then, like, you know, and then, like, but, like, it was hot, and, like, you crutched in there. Like, I didn't, like, I don't, because, like, you know, where you had parked was, it's just like this whole thing. Like, it was still a bit of a journey, but you're right. Trauma bonding is probably the way to put it.
We had all those good conversations we were wanting to have, because we talked about, like, like, career stuff. We talked about, like, mental health stuff, because both of us have, like, late in life mental health diagnoses, which, you know, is not super common. And I think that probably both of our career feelings are because of those late in life diagnoses. Like, our brains were making us do things we didn't really know we were doing, you know, and that probably influenced why we weren't, you know, where we wanted to be to some extent.
Yeah, like, almost like a debilitation. Like, I mean, we were just, you know, sabotaging ourselves in some ways, I'm sure. I mean, I know for me, that's what I was doing. Like, I wouldn't go on a pod, like, I would promote myself, and it's like, I'm trying to be an artist, and it's like, nope, too scary. Like, you're not gonna do that. You're gonna say something stupid. You can't do that, you know? So I totally feel that.
Yeah, and then for me with ADHD, like, I was just jumping from job to job. Literally every job I would get would feel like the thing I was put on this life for. Like, I found my passion, I found the thing I loved. And then I would get another job a year later, and then I would say the exact same thing about it. Then at a certain point, it's like, well, you can't be put on this earth for, like, 12 different things. Like, there's got to be something here that I can, like, stick with. And I didn't realize that it was because of my ADHD that I was, like, jumping and basically, like, starting my entire life over every time I got a new job. So that's why I had never progressed in anywhere that I wanted to, because I just kept sort of, like, restarting.
And to discover that again, like, just later, like, when I so wish that I had the benefit of understanding myself more when I was, you know, in my late teens, early 20s. I just think that, you know, it would have helped a lot. But also, I think that then, like, we get to bring our experiences, like, we have so much more perspective living with something that, you know, for better or worse, affected the trajectory of our lives. And then, like, now we have that experience, and then, like, we can talk about it and hopefully help other people too. Like, so I think that there's, like, you know, there's a silver lining there somewhere.
Well, and I think it is true that it's a bit of a gift that, like, people like us are able to find each other because of that.
Totally. You know? Yeah, like, absolutely.
Like, I think it's cool that we both have that experience, and we literally stumbled across each other. Like, as random as it could be, we stumbled across each other. And then we're able to relate on this level that probably not a lot of people understand, like, what we're going through.
100%.
So let's get into your career a bit, because we've got about 5 minutes or so left that we can talk about this. So talk about like, I kind of want to talk about the transition a bit, because you were in this band called Armors, and then you said I think in the previous podcast I listened to, you talked about how you had like been pushing yourself as Armors for a bit, and then you made the decision very recently to go to just your name, Olen.
Yeah.
Like, what was that thought process like, and like, how did it feel to make that jump?
Yeah. It like, and in retrospect, and I know we touched on it a bit earlier before we were recording, but like, it felt like I had spent like the last, several years in that band, right? And then the personnel had changed, and so there was that whole aspect to it too, where like I was the only original person that was still in it, like, and like from like when the band had started, and so like that part also felt weird, because I was like, well, I don't like it. Does this feel like it just doesn't feel like it's me, because it didn't start out as just me. Like, there were other people and other I when the name got pitched to me, I was like, cool. Like, I wasn't like, like it wasn't this thing where I was like, I wasn't like, really like ride or die for that name, or it was just like, it sounded cool. I was like, yeah, like everyone else likes it. Like, this is fine. Like, it was never like, so I wasn't like like super attached to the name itself. It was just more like the idea of getting to make music. And so anyway, so there's like baggage there, and I want, and then like, again, like spent like the previous 2 years like getting to tour nationally for the first time, like we got to open for like I think we played like, I think it ended up being like 54 shows with Ali and AJ in 2019, just across the country. And then like I was on a tour with this band called Transviolet as Armors, like was our first co-headline tour, and like spending, a couple years like really pushing this, right? And then like the pandemic happening, and then like having all of this time to, be introspective for once, and then kind of realize, well, like, I don't know if like I would feel good if I kept doing this, like, because I feel like I'm like pushing a thing that isn't actually reflective of me, because I didn't choose to be a solo artist at the time, like it was just people in life had different priorities, and like, and that's okay. Like, as we all grow up, I guess, like people just like want to have a family, or they want to, operate in some other career, or they want to do music in a different capacity in a band, like other stuff like that. And there's nothing wrong with that. I just kind of had like been the last person who believed in this one thing, and so if I was going to do that, like I might as well like stake my name on it and like put it, like actually like own it. And so that was the process behind why I wanted to change it. And even if it was slightly career setback, I get to wake up and like be happy to do it every day. So that's all that I think matters.
And, like I mentioned, like I really not listened to a lot of Armor's stuff, and by a lot of I mean any, before I started like listening to your stuff. And I was listening to like the Spotify Olen mix earlier in the week, just kind of like to get ready for the interview and stuff. And a bunch of Armor's stuff popped up like on it. And you really could hear a difference like in the quality of your voice. Like you clearly were like trying to do something. Like you were trying to like do a thing. And you were like enunciating a bit harder. And like I'm used to you in your Olen stuff. And it does feel like you were sort of like doing what you thought you were supposed to with Armors, and with all your Olen stuff, like you're doing like you're being yourself. Do you notice that difference like in your songs when you perform?
Yeah, 100%. Like I think that the what you said about how it in the earlier stuff, like the Armor stuff, it felt like I felt like I was playing a part in some way, or like trying to play a part of like the fan of the band, like, and trying to be mysterious and cool, and like, and so yeah, I think a lot of that came from these expectations that I thought I could fulfill as like the singer, the lead singer, right? And so yeah, like it did me, as like I've matured, I guess, as an artist, or like kind of reframing the way that I approach singing and even writing, the first question I got to ask is like, is this like something that did me and not something that I don't want to like I'm like playing a part, and unless it's like intentional, you know, like because there's definitely room for that too. I do get to be a version of myself. Like I'm not just like a person, but then I'm also an artist. Like, you know, and I'm sure you feel the same way about your writing too, where it's like you can write about, you could be, and you know, you can create any kind of world. You can do what, you know. So there's freedom in that too. But I think that it's for me, I'd had to come from like a choice to do that versus like feeling like I had to fit in a box to then like, you know, like I if I put myself in the box by choice, like, that's cool. But like if I feel forced to there, then it affects the music, it affects everything, you know?
Yeah, and that is the thing that I like super relate to, because whenever I think about me jumping job to job, like I was chasing opportunities what I was doing, but also what I was doing is like doing what I thought I was supposed to. You know what I mean? Like this opportunity came up, so I should do it. This other thing came up, so I should do it. And I feel like you were sort of like, as insane as it sounds, and I like worked in nonprofits and did a lot of volunteer work that I invested a lot in, and you were like touring the country with Ali and AJ. Like I do feel like we were kind of doing the same thing.
Yeah, I completely agree.
So we're gonna go ahead and take a quick break. And when we come back, Olen and I are gonna be talking about mental health and how we incorporate that into our work. Welcome back to Songwriters or Fans. I'm joined once again with Olen, and we are talking about incorporating mental health into our work. And I think this is probably top of mind for both of us because of our late diagnoses that we'd already talked about. But you have some songs really in particular that pretty heavily like discuss your struggle with OCD, and like I think you mentioned in the other podcast you did that off switch, you didn't even know about your diagnosis whenever you wrote that. So
yes.
So like how important to you, like how do you approach it whenever you incorporate that into your stuff?
Totally. I think that, I mean, if we go all the way back to when like I think I had first started writing music and really got into it, it was kind of, it was the way that I helped cope, like honestly, with something I didn't understood. I like didn't understand why I was the way I was, right? And so for me, like I could get everything to make sense if I could like put it in a song. And like that, like, so if I could turn to music and if I could like get it into, you know, if I could put it into this, into a thing, right? Like a manageable thing, it didn't have to spin in my head anymore. I think was kind of how it ended up working out. Like, and so that's like, so even before I knew how it was affecting my mental health and like helping me when I was struggling with OCD, before I understood that that's what it was. So knowing that it was powerful in that sense was great. And then when I wrote that off switch song, it was the day before I started therapy. I had, you know, been able to get connected. I wrote the song because I just felt like I couldn't get my mind to shut off ever. And it was so, it was just debilitating, you know, and like every small social interaction I had, and I'm sure it didn't help too that like it was during the pandemic too. So like they were brief, and you know what I'm saying? Like it was not the same. It just wasn't the same. But like even like I'm talking like ordering food at a drive-through, like that, if like I said something like that I thought was weird by accident, or like I was on speakerphone with a friend once and like he had said something that I thought was like he was making a joke, but it was not a good joke. And like I was like, oh my gosh, like she heard that. And like, you know, like this whole thing. And then like I just wouldn't stop thinking about that thing. And it's like, in, you know, all actuality, like she probably didn't, you know, like all of that, like that stupid joke. But like in my mind, I'm like, I don't know if I can go to that song again, like ever, you know, or like I have to call and apologize, and just like stuff where it's just like spent just, you know, and again, it wasn't even something I'd said. Like it was like, is this whole thing where every interaction that I'd had, and with even like online stuff too, or like podcasts or whatever it was, like everybody was like, especially during the pandemic, it was very much like, oh, we're doing stuff like this, like we're doing Zooms, or we're doing like Instagram lives or stuff like that. Like I was so scared to do any of that because I felt like there was like I would cause harm, or offend somebody, or, you know, just say the wrong thing and just, you know, cause irreparable harm to a person. And so from like that was what was happening every day, you know, and I know the isolation made it worse, but like I was finally able to like sit with it and not cover it with like going and hanging out with friends or like, oh, I have these, I have this tour to go or like, and so like in between driving, playing the show, tearing down, selling merch, getting to the hotel, sleeping, waking up, driving to the next place, like you almost don't have time to like actually like I didn't have time to sit there and let the OCD do its thing. And so like when I was faced with nothing but time, that's when like it came to the front. And so I wrote that song Off Switch the day before I started therapy. And again, not knowing that I was going to be diagnosed with OCD. And then even then, like I wasn't diagnosed with OCD until 3 months into my therapy, because it was just a generalized anxiety disorder, which is what I was diagnosed with at first, which, OCD falls under that category. And so, but I didn't get that specific diagnosis until months into my therapy. So yes, sorry, that was probably a long stretch of words to answer that question, but that was probably not as succinctly as I could have put it, but that's the answer.
Well, just to give you some affirmation, since you talked about being filled about social situations, that was great. I really loved it. I thought it was really good, and it provided a lot of insight.
Oh, thank you.
So it was a good answer. And I feel similarly because I, with ADHD, like you probably feel this way too, because like I'm guessing your OCD wasn't to the extent that you couldn't live your life most of the time. Like generally speaking, people like thought you were fine. And it was a lot of like internal stuff. Probably, I'm guessing, right?
Yes.
Because it was similar for me in that like I would give myself a very hard time if I like forgot something or I was like overly sensitive about like responsibility things, like money stuff specifically was like always really stressful for me. And I'd be like really sensitive if somebody like if I owed somebody money and they asked me like once every 3 months about it, I would get so upset, like irrationally upset. And that's like an ADHD thing. And but then like it really came to a head whenever I was like piled on like tons of responsibilities, because like I was the state president of this like leadership organization in West Virginia, and I had like planned this banquet, and there were like people like counting on it and like asking me questions about like, have you done this? Have you done that? Have you done that? And like I hadn't done most of them, but I was just like outright lying and saying I had, because I felt so ashamed that I hadn't done them yet, the things I said I would do. And I think that it is that thing, like you mentioned with the pandemic and people doing video calls, like it was a thing that probably didn't impact your life that much before that. But like whenever it's all we were doing to communicate, like it was like, it was turned up really high. So like that was whenever that stuff was happening for me, like planning the banquet and all that stuff, that's whenever it was like, this doesn't feel normal. You know what I mean? Like there's something going on that this is like irrationally stressful for me and I don't understand it. Right. And then like once I got diagnosed, it made so much sense because I just understood like how my brain worked a bit better and like why I felt so ashamed about like these normal responsibility things that other people will either just be honest about or just do. And like I can't just do because like the executive function isn't where it should be, So like I do think there's something to be said for like whenever you're like, usually these things aren't a problem until they are. And then whenever they are, they really, really, really are, right?
Yeah, I agree.
So talk a little bit about like, not just, so like, I think that you have made a career basically on your social anxiety, because a lot of the songs you've written as Olen is about like not asking a girl out or like that kind of like expressing a crush that you then never like follow up on. Talk a little bit about like what it's like for you to kind of like incorporate that kind of stuff into your work.
Yeah, I guess it just comes down to it's been something that has been helpful on one sense, like where it does feel like therapeutic for me, but then and other times it gets frustrating where I'm just like, you're so done. Like you wrote a song about it, you didn't do anything. like it's almost like I get to like, and I maybe I'm misusing this term now, but like I'm gonna swing for the fences here, but like I've started thinking about like what limerence is, like this idea that like, like you're having this like relationship with somebody, but not like it's like you're having a relationship with the idea of one. And then like now that I've learned what that is, like I'm like my mind is like totally blown because I'm like, wait a second, am I experiencing like, am I just writing a song about a limerent object in my life? And like people, I guess they'll call people limerent objects, like if they're the subject of your limerence or whatever. And then just like opening, I don't know, it's like a the more I'm learning about stuff like that or mental health, the more I'm just like, oh gosh, and maybe it goes deeper, I don't know. But like I used to like write those songs, like specifically like if it was about like asking someone out, like it would almost serve that purpose in a like a weird debilitating way, and then I just like didn't do anything. So like I don't know, it was good because I got to like channel it into something, but then it was bad because then I'd be like, dang it, I didn't do the I didn't act out, like I just made up a story about what would have happened if I did. And like, so sure, I got to write songs about it, so it like felt like it was a complete waste. But then like as I've started to understand myself a little bit more, it's like you can do both, like you can take the chance, you can have the feeling, you can write about the feeling still. And like I don't know, like some songs, like there's freedom in that, where it's like if something didn't go the way that you thought it was going to go, like you get to make the rules, like you get to say whatever you want to say and write, you be the author. And I think that that's like what's so cool about like being like, whether that's just writing in general, like even if it didn't work out in the storybook way, like, to create a version of it that did, like it's maybe it's not the same as it maybe happening in real life, but you got to channel your pain or your frustration into something that hopefully other people can relate to, and then that they'll be able to take to heart if they've dealt with a situation like that.
Yeah, and that's what I really enjoy about writing about my mental health, because the way that I try to incorporate is I have a character in my novel who he's very me in a lot of ways. Like there's always a character that you kind of like put a lot of yourself into. This is that person for me. So like he has ADHD because I have ADHD, right? Like it just makes sense to me that he's the character that would have that. And what I'm trying to do right now is incorporate a lot of the feelings I had, a lot of the frustration I felt at myself whenever I would like forget this, or I wouldn't do that, or like I wouldn't follow through on things. Yeah. And it was the things I did before I was diagnosed, like before I knew it was a thing. And I feel like those are like the kinds of things that unless you have it, you don't notice. Like I'm really interested in getting like people to read those chapters for them to be like, why is he doing this? And it's like, oh, you just don't know. Like it's
right. Yeah.
It's okay for you to not understand that because it doesn't make sense. But I think that with that said, like, I think it's something where that's something about mental health is like, we need to not be as hard on ourselves, because the truth is, like, I think that both of us, because I feel like you mentioned this, both of us are medicated for our mental health, but like the medicine doesn't fix all of it. Right.
Right. So, it kind of dulls it. Like, or at least in my
makes it more manageable for sure.
Yeah.
But I think that something to remember is like we have to be easier on ourselves whenever we do the things that we know we do, right? So like, even though you may have saw a girl you were into while you were on OCD medicine, like you had trouble ordering food at Sonic. Like telling somebody that you were into them would have been way harder than that, right? So like you can give yourself a bit of grace there, I think.
Yeah, I think that you're right. Like, and that's like one of the benefits of finally having a diagnosis is you get to then go like, oh, I don't have to be so hard on myself. I've been, like these things, and like same thing with what you had said too about like, like following through, or like these other as far as ADHD affected your daily life. I think by acknowledging that it exists, you can then like figure out, like, you don't have to beat yourself up. You don't control, like you can't, like that's how your brain's working, and you couldn't control it to begin with. And so you don't have to then beat yourself up over something like you didn't choose, like, and now you can, and it's a part of you, but it doesn't mean that it has to be the thing that defines you now, or like the thing that then like rules your life. Like it can, on some levels, and I think we talked about this when we were hanging out, like on some level, like superpower, like weirdly. Like, even though there are definitely like debilitating parts about it, like there's also things I think, and like we're probably the people that we are now because we grew up like with those things affecting us and kind of shaping us as we did grow up, and for better or worse, but there are definitely some good things I think too.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing that I did with ADHD is like I would like really ruminate on certain thoughts, like they would just bounce around my head, and I would make connections with things that weren't usually connected, which were like really cool things to realize. Like if I did this thing from this podcast I heard, but do it with like this thing I'm writing, then it would like make an interesting connection that other people may not have recognized because their brain doesn't work the same way as my brain, you know?
Right.
And I appreciate that about myself. And I didn't want to lose that whenever I did get medicated, because that's always the fear, right? Is that like when you get medicated that your brain's going to be, well, healthier, not as creative and not as like the thing that you want it to do, right? I'm sure you probably, I see you laughing because you probably feel the exact same way.
I was so hesitant to get on medication at first because sorry, and I'll please finish your thought too, because I can continue afterward. What were you saying?
Yeah. So what I was saying was like, you know, it was important to me whenever I got medicated was that it was a medicine that I could go off of like on the weekends and stuff, because like he told me that my medication didn't have to be daily. Like I could not take it on the weekends because, you know, like there's less responsibilities on the weekends. I don't have to go to work. I don't have to remember as many important things. And like if I forget my keys in my car, I can just call AAA and they'll get it out on the weekend, you know, whenever I don't have deadlines to meet. And like that's okay. So like that was something important to me. And like what I realized is that like it's not as drastic as that, right? Like I still am pretty creative when I'm on medication. I don't have to give up who I am by taking a slow release, you know, antidepressant. Like it's not as drastic as that, but like there is that fear in your head, right?
Oh, yeah, I mean that was big. I was, you know, pretty hesitant to start medication, and I don't think I would have. Like again, like I was like, I think I might have been like at that point like 6 months or something in therapy, where you know I was like, well, like, would you want a psychologist? Like, you know, we're taking a lot of the right steps, and they're still like you're still being affected. You know, I was like still really anxious a lot of the time. And, you know, and instead of looking at that, like, I think at first I was like, oh, that's because like I'm failing therapy, you know, or whatever. It's like, well, no, it's like if your brain like works this way, like those pathways are like cut deep. And like that's just how your brain works. And so if it needs a little bit of help combating something that is like causing you like immense pain, you know, I guess mental or just mental anguish in general, like there's no shame in that. And yeah, like I think that I don't know, like maybe there is some truth to like because I'm less anxious all the time, maybe like it's affected my creativity. Like, sure, I don't know, but like it's not worth living like that. Like, I don't care if I get to, you know, if I was the most prolific and creative, you know, artist on the planet, but like I was afraid to order at a fast food restaurant, you know, like I just don't think it's worth. For me, you know, like I couldn't justify like living like that because it's just debilitating. And so even no matter if it has affected me creatively, it's like I get to live a life with less anxiety and fear surrounding like normal everyday things. And so whatever it has done to affect my creativity, take it. You know, I get to live a more healthy life. So yeah,
you know, where I land is like, what the hell's the point of being creative if you're not going to follow through, right? Like that's where I was. Like,
hey, totally.
Yeah, because like I couldn't finish a book because like I would give up at some point. Like something else would come along and I would move on. So like it doesn't matter how creative those first 5 chapters were if I never wrote the rest of the book, you know?
Right. Oh yeah. No, I completely agree. And it was kind of like that with me for whether that be relationships or songs or anything. It's like even if I, you know, have like if you have the perfect verse and chorus, but you're like, cool, I am stuck and I can't, you know, like it just wouldn't, you know, it not that it wouldn't matter because I'm sure it helped you in some way, but if you don't follow through with it or, you know, put it out in the world, it doesn't have the opportunity to connect with others.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And like that's ultimately why we do this, right? Because we want other people to consume the things that we create and feel some connection to it, and then like maybe learn something about themselves along the way because we shared parts of ourselves, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. That is definitely the goal.
So this has been wildly therapeutic for me. I don't know about you, but it's just been great to talk to somebody that has gone through so much of what I've gone through. Good too. And I think that we're about to wrap up. If people want to find out more about you, and if you need me to plug stuff for you because you feel anxious about it, let me know. I'm happy to throw in your socials yourself, but I'm going to give you a chance to do it right now. So go and tell people where they can find you if you want to find out more about you.
Yeah. So pretty much on every social media like platform, you know, it's just @Olen is my name. Same with YouTube too. And yeah, and Spotify, just in OLEN or Apple Music, all those places, you'll find my stuff. I just put out an EP called So Codependent, and I am already working on the next set of songs to release. And yeah, thank you so much for having me, Terry. And I know Tuesday is out now, right? It's like fully.
Yes.
It's available on Amazon and the whole thing. So I'm throwing in the plug for you too. I mean, I also at the point, just so I can actually be, I need to actually read it now. So I by the next time I get to talk to you about your character who is modeled off of what you've gone through.
Well, thank you so much. This has been a pleasure.
Most Writers and Fans is a Starlight King production. Special thanks to our guest, Olen. If you'd like to support the podcast, please rate and review it. Also, make sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. If you'd like to send a message or record a voice message, please visit the Spotify page for this show. Links for this and all additional information about Terry Bartley can be found on terrybartley.com. You can also email us at contact@starlightkingpress.com. Thank you for listening, and until next time, don't be afraid to tell your story.